I'm Tiffany, and you are here for the Gender Diversity and Ecology panel. A little bit about myself. I live in the Bay Area of California, more specifically in Oakland on Ohlone territory. I am a co-director at Real Food Media, a small nonprofit where we use storytelling, critical analysis, and strategy for the food movement. So what that work looks like is working with partners on campaigns, putting out our own content, working on events like this one, just to uplift the narrative that we can produce food ecologically and equitably, and that many of us already do. I'm really excited to chair and bring forth today's panel on gender diversity and ecology. So since my passion for all things food was first ignited, I've seen a lot of shift in what we talk about, how we talk about it, and who is featured and seen as farmers. For example, conferences like this are becoming a lot less white, and that's great. And of course, there's still a lot of work to be done to make agriculture and the food movement much more inclusive and representative. And so that's what we're going to do a little bit today. We're going to hear from farmers around the world, the US, Brazil, and Germany, who are challenging the status quo, looking at the world in a way that opens up a larger spectrum of possibilities and showing that there's more than just like two ways of being. And before the panelists introduce themselves, I'm going to just put up some definitions for a minute so we can have a shared understanding of these terms. And thank you to Paula for translating these terms. While people are looking at these terms, I just want to go over a few notes. So this is obviously translated, so we're going to try and speak slowly so that the translators have the time to do the work. We're going to have this panel for about 40 to 45 minutes and then break out into like a question and answer session. And if there is like energy and space with everyone who is attending this afterwards to want to like continue the discussion, then we have the option of going into a separate Zoom rooms, one which will be for Portuguese speakers, another one for English speakers to continue the discussion. And that won't be like facilitated by us. It's more just a space for people to convene. So I'm going to have the panelists mostly introduce themselves. I'm really excited that we have this like wonderful group with us. We have Alessandro from Brazil, who's part of the landless workers movement. We also have Paula, a peasant farmer and beekeeper who's based in Germany, and she is an international coordination committee member of La Via Campesina. We have Xochitl, who works on cross-pollinating traditional ecological knowledge, queer politics, and indigenous philosophies to connect the dots between decolonial botany and queer liberation. And then we have Claire, who works closely with Xochitl on this queer ecology work and who is the assistant manager at Allen Chadwick Garden at University of California in Santa Cruz. Okay, so first, Alessandro, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are, where you farm, and how you relate to this work?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this invitation for us to meet together in this virtual way at this moment, getting together from all over the world. I am from the landless movement here in Brazil. This is one of the greatest movements in the fight for Earth, and I also take part of La Via Campesina, which is the equivalent movement in the world, La Via Campesina. And I am campesino, which means peasant, landless, and I joined the landless movement in 1997. So I have a long history and a triumph in this movement, and it mixes a lot with the whole process of ours here in Brazil, because the farming, you can't consider farming without consider the size of the territory and identity and food and also the dispute or everything that we live today, where we have a huge presence of capitalism and the paper of exportation for the whole world of commodities, of goods, which are soya, beef, minerals, cellulose. So this is our function in the world, which is to produce food, to produce things, foods for capitalism. And then we have to think of this territory or this land means. So that's why we, with our movement, we occupied some land. And I think to consider my relationship with this debate of ecology and also agroecology and agriculture is a relationship of the fact that I've lived in the field, but in this property since I was 8. So there was the time where I was in the cupboard where I had to deny myself. And at the same time, I had to deny the countryside, because in this field in the countryside, there is no room for gays or lesbians or any different gender. So until I was 18, I lived this negation of the countryside and of myself. And after 18, when I took greater part in the movement, so that's when I met myself again, where I assume myself as LGBTII. And that's also, I start to love myself as LGBTI and also the land. So this is the meeting of myself with the land. And we have a song that goes like this: to love the land and deny to plant seeds. We plant them and they plant us. And I think this is summarize what I am in my, as I'm this meeting of this love of the peasant with the field, loving humanity and the land and life and nature and everything, that we are part of it. And I think that our fight is against capitalism trying to turn us into things, into goods, into commodities.
Thank you, Alessandro. Claire, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you relate to this work, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's very hard to follow up, but I will try. And I am also very appreciative for being here, and getting to meet people from all over the world is really exciting. And my name is Clare Riesman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, but I live now in Santa Cruz, California. And I work at the University of California, Santa Cruz, at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. So primarily my work is teaching undergraduate students, introducing them to agroecological concepts, the basic principles of organic farming and gardening, and also teaching beginner farmers how, again, basic principles of organic farming and gardening. How I relate to this work is about 5 years ago, when I first met Edgar in our farmer training program, I was introduced to the concept of queer ecology, and it was a concept that really resonated with me and that helped unite sort of what felt like very disparate elements of my identity, of feeling really drawn to farming and the natural world and plants, and feeling very much a part of that, and also an identity as a queer person. And whereas I think previously I'd seen those as being really separate and in fact, in many ways, like contradictory, queer ecology being a way that really united them and showed that queerness, nature is queer, queerness is natural, and have just really been so supported by studying queer ecology and talking about queer ecology with other people, and coming to accept myself more, and then share that acceptance, hopefully, with other people. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Claire. Paula, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please? Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Paula. Paula, you're muted.
Perdão, eu estava dando problema para abrir o meu microfone.
Sorry, I was having trouble opening my microphone. This is me in the field. You can see the picture. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much for this session. Thank you for the organization ORFC for this impressive conference. I'm a peasant in a farming community in Germany. So there are different farming in our community, and agriculture is what joins us. That's what gives me energy for my day-to-day life, and that's what generates this image you can see. These are queer creatures, and I thought it would be an appropriate image for this. I'm a member of the Via Campesina, which is the peasant organization here in Germany and in Europe. I'm also a member of the International Committee for La Via Campesina. One of the most important of my history is the migrants being. The migrant being from Brazil. I was born and brought up in Brazil, and I came to Germany. I'm an immigrant because I left the city, for the camp, for the country. In terms of profession, I was an academic, and now I'm a peasant. I was born with a woman identity, but now I see myself in a fluid identity in terms of gender, is a queer identity. I'm constantly leading with different idioms to make myself understood in the world. There are very few opportunities like today that I am able to speak my own language and maybe return to my background. Thank you. I left from a patriarchal experience in Brazil, from a city which I thought, and I still think of as queer. And after nearly 10 years living in Berlin, I decided to go to the countryside to immerse myself in the German agriculture world and the European agriculture world. It was a shock to find in this European agricultural world, this German agricultural world, the question of gender, it was too paralyzed. It was below the binary normative in terms of gender, highly influenced by Christianism. So in this context, this is where I came from, and when I came out of the cupboard, and where it started my fight and empowerment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paula. Xochitl, if you could share a little bit about yourself and how you came to this work, that would be great.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or afternoon for some of y'all, evening. My name is Edgar Xochitl, and Z's are pronouns, he, him work well too. And I'm currently on occupied Ohlone territory. And for those of you who don't know where that is, that's currently San Francisco, California. And I am part of a farming collective called Urban Campesinex. And we, I'm the food lead on that, food and flower lead. And it's 6 acres of space in San Francisco. And that's currently where I'm farming. And a little bit about myself. I'm a first generation immigrant, first born here. But my family comes from an agricultural background. So I have, as I've continued my own journey in interacting with these plant ancestors and whatnot, a lot of these old memories have come out, have come through just interacting. But really, I've also been trained academically in ecology. And so a lot of my entry work to queer ecology came from first really being a person of color in the United States, dealing with racism, colonialism, the way capitalism impacts our communities. And so, I'm a firm believer at the epicenter of oppression is the epicenter of resistance. And so exploring my own identity and then coming to terms with my own sexuality and doing all of this while I'm learning about plants and science and soils and everything. And just really like seeing this dark difference and separation of human sexuality and human just the queerness that exists, and how really that is natural, and it's just all this academic jargon, specifically, and it's all based on the legacy of where these sciences come from. They're based out of white cis hetero men creating these ideas of what ecology is. And again, we're seeing ecology and being taught ecology through a colonial landscape, or a colonial lens. And so a lot of my early work was just trying to like uncover who I was, and then just really starting connecting, putting all these things together. Now, as we enter this age of climate chaos, I really am a firm believer that, we need to invest in our ecological ways, but also deconstruct the heteronormative aspects to what this ecology is, because there's no way we're going to be able to be ourselves, to give the best to the solutions if we're still questioning how natural we are. And that naturalness is what's really is going to allow us to bloom, to come up with the solutions to what the chaos is in front of us, how to organize together, how to relook at the same problems from new lenses. So queer ecology has really just been a way for me to really use it to organize in my community. And then I'll explain a little bit more as we go through that. There's the most important part of all of this that I hope people take is that we're all natural, and that queerness is natural, and it's the lens and the way we've been taught, especially in these discussions of sustainability and regenerative science. Colonialism is still there. So we need to do the intersectional work of deconstructing the colonialism that exists in our ecological sciences. So I'll start there.
Nice, thank you. There's already like so much good stuff that's just from hearing a little bit about y'all. So I can't wait to hear even more. Today, we're kind of talking about two different, but like very intersectional things, which is like gender diversity and queer ecology. And starting a little bit with gender diversity, I would want to hear from you all, like what are some of the outdated gender norms and roles that you see play out in farming, and how have they impacted you? And like what strategies have you used to sort of like combat this or do things differently? And if whoever wants to jump in can jump in.
Posso começar? Ok, bom.
Well, it's a good question. We need to understand, and of course we have lots of diversity in the reality. We have to think what's agriculture, what paper it has for humanity. We have discussed a lot here in our movement in the sense of which model of agriculture which dominates, especially thinking about of us who are located in this paper of being colonized. The paper that colonization has played, not just in Latin America, but in other continents as well. And together with this, we add racism, patriotism, and the heterosexism, because these are things which mark today's days. So, because this binarity of gender, how this is marked, and there is a very strong vision, which I think we live this today, when we talk about the country, because for my parents, I think it was easier because they had access to the formation of the movement. So it's important that the farmers, they have access to this formation, to this education, because this is what gets to the country people, what comes from the state and the government. They also see heterosexism, machismo, and this question of transforming, how do you... So I think Edgar has touched this. It's a question of intentionalism. So it's obviously a thinking theory, but we have to see how it impacts on our lives, how they act on our lives. White European colonization, heterosexist, patriarchal, sexism, but it's also, they ignite the question on sexuality, because in our society, they see how they use the body to cover the territory, the land, but also the soil, and how they use the heterosexism, the question of rate, for example, miscegenation. These 2 points that when we hear Paula in Via Campesina, that our fight is against, against the capital, but it's not just against capital, it's against patriarchal systems and racism, because they are together and they fulfill this function of the society, which is binary, which is also related to oppression, exploitation, sorry. And we are on this, in our movement, we have this daily fight, we deal with this every day. And especially the indigenous people who they know how much the indigenous communities here in Brazil have suffered because of, in relation to recover their culture, to be able to live with their culture. It's a question where we have to think that we need other ways of agriculture and other ways of relationship with nature. And this is what we call well living, and that's what to live well, and this is what we learn from these communities. To teach ourselves, and that's how we see how we live well with our own identity, our sexual identity. And this is also part of this project, which is not just, it is against capitalism, patriarchal, and agenda. This is just to get us going.
Thank you, Alessandro. There's a lot there. I want to give it over to Xochitl and then Paula to go ahead and answer that question.
Yeah, so language is super important in how we move forward. And I would say the work we're all doing is intergenerational. And within that, we, at our farm, we've been really looking at traditional knowledge and how do we create more intersectional approaches for youth. And so one of the things that we've started in the last 2 things with just language is there's this big idea of the 3 sisters, corn, squash, and beans, and the ability for them to traditional farming practices. But we've really been deconstructing this idea of just 3 sisters. And again, we're putting gender again on these plants, sisters. And so, this conversation really came out when we were working with our youth and really reevaluating what contemporary families look like. They're not 2 parents. They're not, there's a spectrum of people. And so when we refer to our, and then this led to a bigger discussion of just really removing the 3 sisters and just seeing them as 3 siblings, and then the ability to incorporate other plants into the mix as a way to reflect contemporary plants, because there's a difference between traditional crops and cultural crops. And I'll give you an example of so corn, squash, and beans would be traditional crops, at least speaking from a Mesoamerican approach, where these crops have been through our, they've been part of our our legacy through working with these plants. But, you know, we have plants like cilantro and onions and eggplants that may not be directly traditional, but they've influenced us culturally. Brassicas, the kales, and all those. So as we navigate the future, you know, we need to incorporate these other plants, especially, you know, living here in San Francisco, the brassicas are super easy to grow compared to the solanums. And so as we navigate in the future and we're trying to reduce our lower carbon footprint, incorporating more of those local crops, but also really just thinking of all plants as a form of creating a new family structure, rather than just sticking to the three that we're used to, because then it limits ourselves to just kind of stick to the plants we're used to and not really expand our usage of plants. And as we navigate the future, we're going to need to incorporate what can grow locally, whether or not it is part of our cultural diets, because as we all adapt through climate chaos, that is one way that we all contribute, is eating locally. And what is growing locally? Another thing with that, with urban campesinex, so campesino is farm worker or farmer, but again, with the youth, they wanted to get rid of the O because they wanted to step away just from a masculine side or feminine side with campesina. So this is where the X comes in. It really is a way to remove the gender from the title so that everyone is an earth worker, everyone is a healer, everyone can interact with the earth. And it steps away from just leaving it in this very like traditional masculine way and deconstructing that. And then there's a bunch of other things we use, you know, when we're OA, because again, Spanish is a very gendered language. So in order to organize intergenerationally, it's really looking at what we can use and what we can't. So instead of calling our plants, again, trying to step away from just referring to them as female, that plantita is like that elder, that ancestor, that friend, you know, the other terminology that we can use that is still neutral, but it still gives their respect to those plants without gendering them. Because one other thing, these plants are thousands of years older than humans. They're you know, this idea of gender and sexuality is much younger compared to these organisms. So getting to the point of really seeing them as elders and working within that.
Thank you, Xochitl. Paula? I think you had your hand raised to share.
Sim, obrigada. Eu queria...
Yeah, thank you. Just want to speak about two things. First of all, speak about the agriculture here in Germany, how it structures itself. Generally speaking, we still have some traditional producing farms with dad, mom, and the siblings. So the mom takes care of the kitchen and of the children, and sometimes take care of the seeds, and the dad is the one who drives the trucks and is normally the owner of the land. He's the legal responsible for the land. So the reference of these family and this farm unit is the man. But here in Germany, as the country is very industrialized, we have the agribusiness, and in this way of production, normally you have men as the boss of the business owners of the agribusiness. Women normally are ones who clean and pack the potatoes or other kinds of crops, and the men are those who, as I said, drive the trucks. I'm speaking here of big machines, and those big machines are the symbol of the masculinity. So our experience here in our farm community is a different one. It's a queer experience. It is different from the norm. Here we don't have a boss. There's no, we have a horizontal hierarchy organization. We are not a blood family, but we are a family in a way. We are a group of people who choose to be here. We choose in each other. So we try to constantly think and rethink, reconstruct our activities and our social life, because we are as well part of the whole. So we have to have the auto-criticism and deconstruct things. A second example I wanted to give you is when I started to my struggle with the La Via Campesina and international movement. At first, I was fascinated. I was really amazed with the feminism, with the struggle of the feminism. And it's really important. We had a very clear gender equality politic. Women had space very clearly defined. The knowledge of about the importance of the anti-patriarchal fight was really awesome. But as time went by, I was able to see that this struggle was not able to go further and did not rethink the binary of gender. And I was thinking of myself, where do I fit on this binary way of thinking? Where do we fit, those who are like me? Are we part of this movement or not? So I was thinking of that, and I raised up my voice. And I thought, well, La Via Campesina is a global movement, progressist radical movement. So we have to speak of that in our movement as well. And when we started to bring up these questions, it was 2014, 15, I think, here in Europe at least. And I was very surprised of the result. These questions were very well, very openly received. And that for me was astonishing, and I was very moved because at the same time, without any communication between us, the landless movement in Brazil started to do the same. So it's very important to say that bringing these questions to the La Via Campesina struggle does not mean to undermine the struggle of women, because their fight is really important. And that's all for now.
Thank you. So I feel like so far I've heard a lot of good stuff. We need to, a lot around deconstructing and rebuilding institutions and structures, kind of like the importance of our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and how we relate to the natural world. And also just how the importance of language. The words that we say, it informs how we think and how we view the world. And lastly, Paula, what you were talking about of just like, where is the space where I can fit in and how do I fit in? I think that really like leads us right into queer ecology. Like, what does it mean to what is it? What does it mean to practice it? And what does it look like in action? Claire, I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, thanks. I'd say queer ecology at its like foundation resists definition, resists sort of constraint and like articulation, but what is there to say about it? It's a questioning. It's an expansive way of looking at ecology beyond the ways that at least in my experience, and I think especially in the US context, we've been taught about ecology and what ecology is. And it's a real emphasis on control and organization at the foundation of modern, ecology and botany in like the US European context is this taxonomic system, the binomial nomenclature of the generic name and species name, the two names for each plant, actually for all organisms. And that is a way of organizing the world, but it's an organization towards control and like domination over other organisms and a hierarchical way of organizing. And queer ecology is a response to that, that says that affirms all life, and that says all life is as valuable as any other life. No organism, no expression, identity, behavior is better than any other. It questions this idea of reprocentricity, which is a real focus on sexual reproduction, the idea that if a behavior leads to sexual reproduction, perpetuation of genetic material, offspring, it's good and natural, and that's sort of how Darwin has been interpreted. The survival of the fittest, competition, all of that. Queer ecology is a response that says actually collaboration, cooperation, mutual support is the predominant way in nature, rather than competition, which is I believe that this competitive framework, this like survival of the fittest, is a way of justifying capitalism and making capitalism seem to be the norm and what's natural. And queer ecology is a way of questioning that. So it's highlighting examples of queerness in the natural world when species or individual organisms demonstrate what we would call queer behaviors. But queer ecology is also a way of saying that queerness is a human construct. We've made it up. It's a way of describing our social relations to one another, and it actually doesn't apply to the natural world. So both. Queer ecology is a very both and, holding many things together and not saying one story is the true story. And then as far as ways of practicing queer ecology, I want to share a picture. Edgar and I, at the farm that I still work at and that Edgar was working at a few years ago, there's a tradition of a queer farmer field day, and it's a way of celebrating queer farmers and showing that the farm is a queer space. I think we get this idea that it's a very, I think like Paula was explaining, that it's a very we get this idea that farms are very heteronormative. It's a man and a woman and his wife and their baby, and that's what a farm is. But we like to flip that on its head and say the farm is actually a really queer space. Queer people are welcome here. Queer people are celebrated here. And so I'll share, if I can figure out how to do that, just a picture from our queer farmer field day from a number of years ago. But these are the farmers on the farm. These are the queer farmers who are doing that work, and we're celebrating, as Alessandro was saying, the bodies, and celebrating our expressions and our beauty. And it's a really lovely day where we connect people with the farm and plants. And I'll stop there so my other panelists can share. Thank you.
So Chip, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, queer ecology, I really see it once we can move beyond the academic aspect of it, because you can get stuck there and just be like, oh, we're relooking all these things. It's easy to get stuck in the theory, right? You're looking at how all these things have played out in the way we look at science. But what does it look like in practice? Claire just showed that picture of us organizing Queer Farmer Field Day, but also, for me, the interaction with, as we're working on things or on the land, and then just referring to these plants and these, like, this language of like, okay, these are our plant ancestors, or these are the plant elders, or really, when I really try to emphasize with these youth, because I work with a lot of youth on the farm, is just reinforcing that they are natural. Because we're told continuously by society that we're unnatural. We're unnatural as people of color, as immigrants, as queer folks, as, you name it, poor. There's just like all these things that society continuously tells us that we're unnatural or unworthy. And for me, that is part of the long-term work of this, is to start with younger folks. Because for us as an adult, and speaking for myself, I spend more time deconstructing ideas that were taught to me rather than building off the ideas that, the good ideas I got as a kid, I'm still working with those, right? And so how do I reinforce that with nature and these youth who are showing some interest in ecology? And so, let's say I'm working with 20 youth, maybe there's 2 of them that will follow this in a bigger picture, but they all got the same queer ecology like concepts, so they can take those with them, and then they can enter any field of life that they want to go. But at least we all understand that the planet is, youth know this more than anyone really. The planet is unstable. The climate is unstable. And so regardless of what they do in their future, they all will be impacted by the climate. And so having the same tools will allow the people who are actually going to like pursue life journeys and try to solve these problems. It'll give them support from the side. Someone else can take the lead, but if everyone is on the same page, they're supporting them so they can get all. And what that support looks like is if a youth is gender nonconforming, their peers are okay with that, and they understand that that's natural. Because that's really, being comfortable with our own skin is how we come up with the better solutions, because we're not spending the mental energy shielding ourselves from like our sexuality or immigrant status, whatever it is. So I feel like for me, turning it into an organizing tool, and using queer ecology to spark the discussion, but then from there it's like, okay, we're talking, but we're also working. And so because we still need to get stuff done. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Alessandro, I know you also do a lot of work with youth. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Sim, praticamente, né, no nosso movimento.
So yeah, in our movement, the youth, the young are the ones who are fighting for these questions, the queer ecology, for instance. So we have a territory where we have at least 1 million people who are in a way linked to our movements. We have more than 400,000 farms of the landless movement. So you have a lot of territories, settlements, where we have cooperatives, where the people gather themselves to produce together. So we have space of fight that use the agroecology as the core technology and as a way of relating to the life and the land. So what we try to do is to say to the youth, we cannot just bring a flag and say we are different, we like to kiss boys and girls. No, that's not it. We can, of course, talk about that, but we have to think about the universe of the people who we are approaching. We want them to respect and to be respected, but we fight for land. So I think that's one of the things that is different in our movement from the urban movements. For us, the civil union is a very important thing, but we want as well to have the right to live, to exist, to be, to live as human beings. We must think and talk about the LGBTI in the rural areas, but we have to think and fight for the lands. We still have a very big problem. We have to fight against those who own these lands. So that's one of our main struggles. So that's as well a thing for us. We don't use the queer word, but that's a choice, because we have at the universities at least 15 universities where we think and talk about the queer theory. But for now, we are working with the gender and the sexuality, and we have to recognize that we are further back, and we have some questions we still have to think and to rethink. And when we talk about the agroecology, at some point we will we will meet at the gender equality and gender diversity. We are not against gender, the queer theory, not at all. But there's a language thing, as Edgar said. We have to think as well about the binary the binary way of speaking. The Portuguese language is a binary language as Spanish is. So we have to rethink all of that. And when we think about our territory, as we say, our right to have a land was denied. So in that way, our body is a territory as well. It's the extension of our land, of our territory. We are what we eat and where we live and the groups with which we have a relationship. So we have to think, rethink all of our way of doing things in a global way. So how can we be freed of these capitalism way of thinking? We subvert this way of thinking. That's why, for me, it's important to rethink our existences, to reaffirm new identities, but it's important as well to present different ways of existing. So when we analyze the indigenous people that lived in a way where there were like seven different genders, we can see that there are different ways of building humanity. And as we live in a global world and a capitalist world that is transforming and killing the diversity, we have to struggle and reaffirm the importance of that. So with the youth, we are trying to give a new push to the movement. A lot of LGBT people who live in the rural areas have to leave those because, because of discrimination. Because in a rural area where being heterosexual is the best thing in the world, well, those who are not hetero-cis is banned and pushed away of those communities. So the young LGBTI are denied of their identity. So when we have the possibility of building the movement, including the LGBTI questions, I think it's a very interesting, very important result of the struggle of the workers in Brazil. I wanted to show you some pictures as well. I'm going to share my screen with you. Those are pictures that show that the resistance of the LGBTI people is important, that they have the right to exist and love, but those pictures show as well that way of being and existing denied by the capitalism. And I always speak about that because for us to struggle and to reaffirm our project for the society is very difficult, and to approach our comrades that say, well, we have an economic problem, our problem is capitalism, and that's all. And we are, no, that's not the only problem. We have the racism problem, we have the LGBTI problems, so we have to approach and think about that. And another thing is to think about the existence of the transgender people, because...
Sorry to interrupt really quickly. Alessandro, we can't see the photo, so your screen isn't shared.
Ai, desculpa.
Sorry about that. Just a second.
Okay. And then also we just have a few minutes left. And so as you finish that thought, Alessandro, I just want to, I don't know, that time went by really quickly, so I'll go to some Q&A from folks in the audience. But please finish your thought, Alessandro.
Certo, obrigado. Desculpa aqui pela demora.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm going to show you some pictures, which is shared from members of the movement, and they lived in the countryside. Here, this is Mariana Arantes and Diane. They lived in occupied land in the south of Brazil with their son. This is Maria Lucelma from the northeast of Brazil. She's in front of a house So it's a mud hut. So this is the type of dwelling for very, very poor people. So this is a house where she lives in the, there's a couple of two male partners who live in the corn plantation Paraíba. This is another Susie, is a female name, and he uses this name in his community. And this is around, he's in his land where he works. He works with this is how he works. This is Sally and Gelda, a couple in front of their field. So this is their daily lives working together. There's a Sereia. She's a trans woman from Maranhão in the north of Brazil. So this is a settlement where she's collecting water from, so you can see that she's taking water from the ground in front of her house. So these are teachers, this couple in a settlement in Santa Catarina. Mariano is in a collective farm. You can see a group of people working together. They're part of the collective, and he chose to have the picture taken there in this collective community field where he has taken on the flag. So this is another trans woman in the landless movement in Minas Gerais. Is also taking part in reforestation projects. So in 10 years, they've planted 100 million trees. Sorry. So I'll stop here because there are several other things. So these are very members of the party. So this is a world company, a world campaign for La Via Campesina. So they are coloring the territories and planting fighting resistance.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing those images with us. Okay, so I want to go through some of the questions. Well, we have 6 minutes, so I'll go through, maybe we'll hit on like one of the questions from the audience, and then there will be 2 Zoom rooms available, one for Portuguese speakers, one for English speakers, if you want to continue the discussion. But just to let you know, it's not going to be like facilitated. So it's more about people who want to talk amongst themselves to continue on this conversation. So I think for the final question, what action would you like to see to acknowledge the queerness of nature and queer people in ecology and agriculture that's beyond representation? And I'd love to hear from Paula or Claire first, and I'll repeat the question. So what action would you like to see to acknowledge the queerness of nature and queer people in ecology and agriculture that's beyond representation?
I can say really quickly, I think it's pretty simple, is like I just always hold my heart when I'm saying this point of just like establishing one's own connection with nature and strengthening that relationship with whatever your environment is, whatever, wherever you are, whatever your landscape is, building your relationship with the natural world as a mutually supportive one. And building, self-trust, self-identity and strengthening your own understanding of your own naturalness and beauty. And I think that is a source of strength that will carry through, all of the fights that need to be had, and it's a source of, it's a very renewable source of energy, in my opinion. So that's what I'll say.
Nice, thank you, Claire. And then actually Paula wants to answer another question, another great question from someone, which is they're wondering how we can advance that there's more like queer people in rural areas. And they think this links to why rural areas are in decline. So Paula, you have some thoughts on that?
Sim, eu acho
yes, I think that the fight for justice of gender is is fundamental to our fight in the food chain for our change for just prices, for seeds, for the knowledge of the peasant. And in Europe, we lose a huge amount of peasants on the last few decades, and we can't afford to lose anyone who wants to stay or come to the countryside, especially as a question of identity or gender. So I think that inclusion of gender diversity in our fight, in our agricultural fight, and our fight for maintaining the rural communities in Europe is an essential element for Europe. And I'll join this. This is essential to turn this continent, European continent, a sovereign continent in relation to food and feeding in general. And as a consequence, this continent should stop exploiting other continents and allow other agricultural systems from other regions in the world can be maintained and reconstructed, because Europe is destroying lots of these food systems. And because of all of that, I'd like to say that food sovereignty, yes, but colorful and full of diversity.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so we have a minute left. And I'm before we break out into those separate rooms, I'm just wondering, could y'all share quickly like any way that people can connect with you or follow your work? Maybe we can say it or put it in the chat. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this session. I wish that we had more time to talk and be in conversation and to learn from you all. Yeah, any final thoughts?
Well, people could find me on the internet. Ecochicano is my email, Instagram, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. ECOXICANO. But I'll put it in the chat right now. But thank you, everyone. That was a good conversation.